Welcome everyone to the ADONIS 11 update webinar. My name is Anthony. I am a member of the customer success team, and it is my pleasure today to take you through the new and improved ADONIS user interface. Here's a brief outline of what we'll be looking at today. In the design and document scenario, we will go through the new start page, take a look at how the modeling experience has changed. I will then explain some new relations we can create specifically for processes and models. We will take a look at how to use the Find and Analyze tabs and where we can find the Knowledge Center. And lastly, I will take you through the other scenarios, specifically Control and Release, Read and Explore, and the Org Portal to see what has changed in those scenarios in ADONIS 11. I just want to take a moment as well and quickly reassure everyone who's watching that all the familiar features from ADONIS 10 are still here in ADONIS 11. The main changes really boil down to certain options being moved to different places within the tool, and of course, I will be focusing on these changes and show where you can now find those familiar features. So that being said, let's actually jump into ADONIS. Let me just quickly log in with our power user. Having logged in with our power user, a designer in this case, we can see now that there's actually no more scenario start page. So just to give you some context there for comparison, this is actually what it looked like when you logged into the tool in ADONIS 10. You had the selection here. So here in ADONIS 11, that's now gone, but you can still toggle through the different scenarios up here by hitting that drop-down arrow right next to the home icon. So you see you still have the three scenarios up here, whereas in ADONIS 10, this is how they appeared. Another change as well, specifically from ADONIS 10, if we look back at the previous version, we go to Design and Document, you'll notice that we have this navigation panel on the side. Going back to ADONIS 11, again, we can see that another change in this new tool, or this new version of the tool rather, is that the navigation bar that used to be to the left, that black one, has actually been retired. But again, I want to assure you that all the features that were listed on that navigation panel right here, these are all still available in ADONIS 11. Again, they just have been moved to other areas within the tool. Focusing specifically on changes to ADONIS 11, maybe some new features, for example, things that I'd like to point out. There's actually a new feature here, the banner at the top of the page. That's actually something that's been added. This banner, actually, the one that says the ADONIS Enterprise, the ADONIS sort of logo here, that's actually something that can be customized, meaning you can actually add your corporate logo here to give the tool a little bit more of a bespoke feel, and that's something that can be done very easily within the admin toolkit. Some other changes on the start page. From here, we can access our recently opened, right? So as before, works the same way. The tool's tracking anything that you recently opened and placing it here. The idea being you can get to where you want to go a little bit faster without so many clicks. And of course, you can also access your favorites here. So if you already favorited any models or objects, you'll be able to find them here. So again, we know that using the recently favorites, you can start and click on a particular model that you were working on or an object, and then be taken into that model you were working on right away to maybe finish it, submit it for release later on, for example. But the real question is, though, what if then you wanted to actually create something from scratch? How would you do that? To do that, you actually go to this new button at the top here, this new button. Clicking that, selecting new, we are actually brought to a selection window. The top items under the recommendation banner here are actually something else that's configurable in the new version of ADONIS. Essentially here, what we're seeing here, the most commonly selected objects and models that this user uses, and that's something that can be determined again in the admin toolkit. So again, your admin or another user, for example, could decide, you can communicate that to say, the most commonly things that you are using actually be placed in the recommendations banner right above, so you can find them right away. Of course, though, beneath that, we do have the complete selection, so the complete choice, if you will, of all the different things that we can create in ADONIS. So for example, we can see some other model types we can create. Down here, IT systems models, data models. Again, these can obviously be selected. But again, if you wanted to maybe find some of that information very quickly, you could also take advantage of the filter up here. So for example, if I wanted to focus on creating an object that maybe had something to do with IT, so as part of the IT layer of our meta model, you can obviously select that, and there you go. The tool will then filter down to show you the objects that are related to the filter in which you've activated. So in this case, I'm only seeing the objects and model types that relate to my IT layer. So again, just to recap, again, the recommendations banner can be configured. You would ideally be placing here the most commonly selected model types and objects that users are using or creating, maybe on a daily basis, for example, or a weekly basis, more frequently rather. And then down here again, you'd have the complete selection, but of course you could always filter up here to obviously reduce the selection available below. Otherwise as well, just maybe to mention that the selection here can also be configured and tailored to a given user or users based on their access rights to the meta model. And that's something that's also, again, defined by the admin. So again, if you need help configuring or simplifying your meta model, you can either contact them, your key account manager, or myself, and we can actually help you to do that. But again, if you wanted to do it yourself directly in the tool, please note the filter up here. All right. So again, when we're talking about knowing that if we want to actually create a new model, we can do that here. So for example, again, from the recommendations banner, we can hit create a new business process diagram. When we select that option to actually create a new model, we're brought to what we would call sort of a new optimized modeling panel. The reason I would say that it's been sort of optimized is if we quickly compare it to ADONIS 10, we can see that the modeling canvas as well, just take a minute to load here, is a little bit smaller, actually rather a lot smaller. The repository was a bit in the way, you'd have to close it. And of course, there was also this modeling barrier that obviously had caused some problems with some users, because once their models got too big, they'd always have to resize. So it's a little bit frustrating. So obviously, of course, in that case, in ADONIS 11, we've made sure to actually get rid of that. There's now no modeling barrier. The repository is actually closed by default. The object palette has shrunk as well. So you really see most of the screen is actually dedicated to modeling. So I really hope that you're going to see that as a positive feature and a positive change in the tool. So of course, the first things that we can do, just to maybe go through some of the changes here on this new modeling canvas. Again, maybe I go full screen just to make everything a bit more obvious. So we've selected a new business process model. We can, of course, still name it. You can actually do a quick naming up here, for example. So we can give this new business process a name. Let's call it customer, or rather, let's say something a bit different here. How about create new customer, and then let's just underscore my username. There we go. So again, like before, the name will appear in red. You know that if you hit save, of course, obviously, and you were to place it in some sort of target group, you can then, that would actually then turn gray, and you know that the model was saved. But we'll keep that, we'll leave that as is for now. We can see here as well that there's the collapsible model header. All right, so again, we can see here that if there was anything entered, we'd be able to see the process owner, the current state, it's valid from, so it's lifecycle information. Again, that information, once it's actually filled in, we'll get to that in just a moment. We just maybe recall really quickly, obviously, you can do that from the properties notebook here. Again, we'll get to this in a second, just to know that you can obviously expand or reduce that information as well from the header. So again, maybe just to show as well, let's just pretend if we were to actually have created something, just maybe to go through it a little bit differently, just to show you as well, if we were to actually save this model, this is actually a change, and you briefly saw it appear on the screen. Now what you have to do is you would actually be encouraged by the tool to, instead of saving this model again in your temporary folder, you do have the ability right away, once you save it, to actually move it into some sort of folder that maybe other users have access to. So again, you will be prompted to actually move your model out of the temporary section as well when you hit the save icon. All right, so again, maybe we're getting a little bit too ahead of ourselves, talking about too much. So let's maybe start back from basics. If we're going to design something, Obviously, in that case, we'd probably want to start with pools and lanes. So again, very easily, I can select the pool, can drop it in like always, right? So I selected from my object palette here. Again, you'll note that the object palette can, of course, always be filtered, right? Right now we're seeing BPMN basic, so all the basic sort of objects, if you will, and icons that would be associated with BPMN. Of course, if you wanted to see maybe some more objects, you could do that. And of course, that would actually reveal some more information down here, but let's stick with basic for now. So pools and lanes, actually a new change here is that they can be selected a little bit more easily. If you actually just press on their name, you can actually move them around a lot easier than before. So now that's something that's actually been solved, and it's a lot easier to move these around and adjust them. Again, same thing with lanes. We can obviously put those two, we can put 2 lanes in this given pool here. And if we wanted to start modeling, of course, you know, we would start off with some sort of start event, place that here, for example. And of course, as you know, that brings up the hover modeler. So again, similar features, in fact, the same features rather from ADONIS 10 are present here in ADONIS 11. For example, the hover modeler is working the exact same way. We can add maybe a few tasks. Again, remember the hover modeler, what it's doing. The idea is that it's suggesting to the user most likely things that are going to come next in the sequence. In this case, maybe another task, maybe a gateway, for example, another task down here, another task, maybe an end event, for example. And then, of course, using our magic relation tool, we can just complete that circle. And there we go. So there's our simple skeleton. So just to show you again some other features, again, just to make it clear, there is now no modeling barrier. So of course, as big as this model gets, you will be able to still easily navigate through it. In terms of actually creating some, in terms of actually enriching your documentation, same as before. If, for example, I wanted to rename this task, I could quickly either hit F2 and I can rename it, for example. Obviously, I can also double click on it to open up the notebook. It's another possibility to change the name, for example. And that works with any other object. If I wanted to rename the start event to a proper trigger, hitting F2, I could do and use and make use of quick naming. So now that we have our skeletons, I've already gone over how we can maybe quick name to add in some extra information. You might be wondering, well, what about enriching? Has anything changed there? Not really. That's the answer. It works the exact same way via drag and drop. Just the only thing is you might be noticing, well, where is my repository? If you wanted to start enriching this documentation, obviously you would need to access your Object Explorer. To access your Object Explorer, you'll notice that there's this blue arrow all the way to the left-hand side of your screen. If you open that up and click on it, that actually opens up your repository. And again, of course, you can collapse it. So again, always making sure that you have the most amount of space possible for modeling. As you know, our Explorer is obviously divided into models, objects, and our quick access tabs. And again, from quick access, just as a reminder, you can still access your favorites and anything that was recently opened. So from my favorites, for example, maybe I can just select an object, for example. Maybe I can choose, let's see what we have here. Maybe we can choose a role, for example, the private customer account manager, let's say. Obviously, again, via drag and drop, same as before, put them onto a task, name them as a responsible person. That obviously allows them to appear underneath. If we, of course, have multiple tasks within a swim lane, as we do here, for example, you'll notice that, again, if we actually drag and drop this person over the lane, we can assign them as a resource. And again, just to make things very clear, if I then click on the name of the lane, in this case with a right click to open up the context menu, I can then assign responsibility to that lane, and that person then actually appears underneath all the tasks within that lane. So again, what you do, just to go through the steps one more time, drag and drop onto the lane, for example, you would select resource. In this case, I'm not going to do anything here. That'll obviously change the name of the lane automatically, and then clicking on the name of the lane that's changed, you would go right click, you would assign responsibilities to tasks, and then of course that person would then become responsible, or in terms of the RACI definition, responsible for execution of all the tasks within that lane. So again, dragging and dropping, it works the exact same way for everything else. If we wanted to add, for example, if I check my favorites here, we can say Perhaps we can add, in this case, actually, if we go to our objects, I can find, let's say, a risk maybe to add, right? We wanted to add a risk, same thing, drag and drop, assign risk, the icon appears. So again, that feature of dragging and dropping to populate is still here. We're still working the exact same way. There's actually been no change there. If we wanted to create a new object, though, so of course I've been using objects that already exist in my repository, so these reusable things that maybe someone else has created. If we wanted to create a new object, we could either go back to new, right? You'll recall if we go back here, of course, we can choose an object from here below. Or what we can do is if we have organized our folder like this, right, in our Object Explorer, again, you'll recall that if you click on a file, you can obviously create a group in it, so a new file folder or a subfolder from the parent folder at the top. You can also create a new object, right? So if I were to, for example, remain here, if I wanted to create maybe, let's say, a new risk, obviously I can then choose specifically from, again, sort of a filtered version of all the objects that I can have. I can create and easily select risk, it should be very obvious, and I can then create that new risk, right? So the first thing that would happen is that the notebook would open up, I would name it, fill out some of the chapters here. Obviously, if I wanted to show more information, maybe I would go to show all to reveal some more advanced chapters that might be relevant to my user, for example. And then of course, once I'm done, I would hit save and this object would then join the repository and obviously become, as you're already aware, reusable, and I can then use that risk in different tasks, for example. So in terms of creating a new object, again, just to kind of simplify everything, again, you could go back to new and select the object from the options there. You can also create it directly from the folder with a right click. If you don't want to necessarily search for anything, of course, and you wanted to actually create something like, say, a risk directly on a task without having to necessarily drag and drop it and navigate further, again, you know that there is another way to do it. There's a more sort of, let's say, if you want to use the term maybe manual, for example, you go to the notebook of the task and you would go to this little plus icon. And of course, from here, you can then choose to, let's say, add a risk, for example, or of course, next to it, the option to actually create something brand new, to create a new object. And of course, you would then, again, the tool is asking you, where would you like to store this new object? In this case, maybe you want to place it in a given subfolder of your risks if that's what you're creating. Again, you'd give it a name, hit OK. Maybe let's do that together. Test risk, for example, put it here, hit OK. And obviously that creates the object. It'll still create the object in the repository as well. And of course, it also creates the icon. So again, that's just a summary and the process of creating, for example, documents or other roles, any basically of the attributes that you see here in the notebook of a particular task, it would work the exact same way. So creating a control would work the exact same way. And again, if we go to our Object Explorer here, we search for that, right? We can then see the object that we created here also appears here and also becomes drag and droppable, right, onto another task, potentially maybe in a different model. So again, hopefully object creation now is clear. There's a few different ways to do it. So now that we've gone through some of these, modeling features, again, hopefully you're seeing that not much has changed, very similar. And in fact, again, it's actually exact as it worked. It works the exact same way as it did in ADONIS 10. The main change really being in terms of convenience, the modeling border now being removed, a bigger screen to actually work on your model. And of course, as well, the ability to kind of move around and select your pools and lanes a little bit easier, again, just by actually clicking on the names directly. You can easily select the lane in that sense. So again, now that we've gone through some of these modeling features that I'm sure you're very well aware of, let's take a look at a pre-populated model to see some of the other changes that ADONIS 11 actually offers. So again, I'll just choose from my quick access here. Let's take a look at, actually, let's see, try to find a good one for you. Let's actually go back here and let's take a look at, I think this should be a good one here. Yeah, there we go. All right, so let's take this as an example. So this is the sort of a fuller version mind you, rather, of the one that we were creating a little bit earlier. So create new customer process. We can see here, for example, obviously this model is quite large, right? We can obviously, if we wanted to down here, we could decrease the size of the model, right? We could obviously zoom to 100%. And of course, we can then use the plus to zoom in a little bit more onto one particular area of the model. While that's new, some of the other navigation features aren't and already existed in ADONIS 10. So for example, if I hit Control and I zoom into, let's say, this task here, I will actually be brought into and be able to zoom in to this area of the model. And of course, scrolling backward, I could then zoom out again and zoom into a completely different part of the model as well. All right. So again, navigation features more or less the same. And if anything, they've just been simply enhanced down here. So we can obviously fit to window, for example, zoom to 100%, and again, decrease and increase at will just down here. Another feature that you might have actually noticed already, as I actually scroll through this model, you'll notice that the names of the lanes actually are locked. So what this actually means is you'll always know kind of where you are. I mean, here it's very simple. Obviously, we only have really 2 employees involved in this process, but imagine if you have 3, 4, or even 5, as you get down through the model, if these names were hidden, it might be easy to make a mistake. It might be easy to forget who's actually responsible for what. So I think it's quite a nice little feature here, especially, if you haven't actually done the quick lane assign, right here again, in this example being very obvious, but if you have not done that quick lane assign, again, you might get confused as to which lane you're in. So again, in this case, minor improvement, but one that I think is useful, is the name of the lanes actually lock in place, allowing you to kind of, so the names essentially scroll over top as you move through your model. So again, you'll be able to keep track of exactly where you are and whose lane you're in at all times. In terms of other changes, the modeling panel itself has been redesigned and reorganized. Again, all the functions are still there, but just maybe to show you that if you wanted to, for example, share this model as, let's say, an image or a PDF, all you'd have to do is just go to the share button, right? And that's now to the left-hand side of the screen. You can share a link, obviously create a PDF, or even export an image in this case. And that's where you'd actually find that information. They're all now consolidated. All those features from ADONIS 10 are actually consolidated here underneath share. So I already mentioned briefly before as well, not much else has changed. Of course, we have our save as here. Of course, we have a validation feature. We'll get to that in a moment. The release feature as well. By the way, as well, just maybe since I'm moving past it, if you ever wanted to favorite something, again, just to maybe point it out, not everyone knows, you can actually hit that little star. That actually is going to favorite this model, me for next time, of course. It'll then appear in my favorites. You can also do that, by the way, again, if we just open up our model or object explorer, if you wanted to favorite something, let's say I wanted to favorite maybe some other different model, maybe one of these ones down here. Again, you can just, by right-clicking on it, the ability, so from the Object Explorer, Models Explorer, right-clicking on the name of the actual model. In this case, we're looking at a particular landscape view. Point being is that from the context menu, you can also add to favorites. So again, doing that will then allow that object to actually appear here under quick access. But like I said, getting back to the sort of modeling panel above, we can see another change in ADONIS 11. So right now, so what used to be called the graphical view is now called the model view. That's what we're looking at right now. If we were to toggle to, for example, the tabular view, we can still do that. So again, as you might recall, the benefit of the tabular view, of course, first of all, is we can use it to filter for a particular object. If I hit tasks, obviously that's going to filter my tasks here. I can then maybe sort the columns, for example, the order in which those appear, right? Can filter that. And then from here, if I was actually able to edit this model, in this case, as you can see here, it's locked because it's actually been released. You know that in general, the way it works is you can copy and paste things onto this particular tabular view to quick populate, essentially. Maybe we can take a look at an example of that just really quickly. So if I go back to, let's say, my previous diagram. There we go. And I go to my tabular view. You can see here I can obviously sort for my tasks, right? In this case, again, you might be wondering, where did my ordering go? Can I order? How do I do that? Maybe just to refresh that as well, since we're here. Just quickly show you from the 3 dots at the side here that you can open up the context menu. And down here is actually where you can number your objects, in this case, horizontally. Going to the tabular view again, we can see that it's already been filtered. I'm selecting my tasks. The tasks are ordered if I want them to be. There we go. And again, I can start adding information. So for example, let's pretend I had an Excel opened and the description of these tasks was there. Obviously, I'll just do it quickly here. So for example, keep it simple. So again, just to show you what I've done is I've hit Command C, I can hit Command V, just to show you again that these slots are actually, you can copy and paste information directly into them. So again, they're for, like I said before, quick populating. So of course, if you hit F2, you can name things really quickly, copy and paste information. Anything you actually change here, for example, also will affect the modeling view, as you're aware. So for example, if I were to, let's say, change the type of task that this one is, right? So let's say I change it to a manual task, let's say, and maybe this one too, for example, a user task. Again, if I hit save, right? Oh, in this case, actually, let me just go back to the model. Don't want to show that just yet. What we can do is we can see here that anything that I changed in the tabular view, right, will then affect the modeling view. So again, you see here that this little icon, maybe let me zoom in just a little bit, little hand icon appeared. We have the info icon appearing, indicating that there is indeed a definition, or rather a description of this task, right? We're seeing them both. And again, just as a reminder, if you wanted to choose these icons from the graphical view, if you click on a task, for example, to open up the hover modeler, you can, of course, choose the quick conversion tool to actually add these icons from the little wrench here, right? So you get a drop-down menu and you can choose. Maybe as well, just to say, what if you wanted to maybe, add a new task in here? Let's say, just to show you, the auto heal feature is actually still available as well. Adding a new task is also perfectly fine. You can also drag and drop a new task in between. Again, all those features are still there. And again, just noting the ability to scroll, having the swim lane lock, again, I think is now, as the model gets bigger here, you can see, hopefully, that this is a nice feature to have. So again, maybe going back to the one that was more populated. So we've covered the benefit of the tabular view, how to navigate to it, how to filter it, how to enter information via copy and paste very quickly. And of course, also we have the textual view of the model as well. Again, this is more for the purposes of a reader. Essentially, if someone is not super familiar or very familiar at all, really, with EPMN 2.0, again, it maybe just creates a nice, easier way to actually browse through the model and condenses the important information in it. For example, what are the important relevant documents? In this case, data inputs that they need. What are some of the risks? And for example, they can then play around with the columns that actually appear here to kind of make it a little bit more bespoke to that particular user's needs and what they're actually looking for. All right. Now that we've gone through some of the different changes, we've seen how it's a little bit different now, how we access the graphical view, tabular view, and textual view. Just to show you as well, maybe just to point it out, as it was skipped over, I'll come back to the Insights dashboard, but just to mention the Properties notebook. Again, this model is currently locked for editing, but just to show you, to go through, again, you can favorite from here. If you open up the Properties notebook, you can see all the different chapters that we have, right? Name, description, aim, trigger, and result. Again, all the same. We can classify our process the exact same way, and so on. So we'll come back to the Properties notebook, as there's some other changes that we'll get to. But like I said, we'll get to that in just maybe a moment. I just wanted to show you how it works. Again, if you click the Properties up here, it opens up the notebook for the entire process, right? To open up the notebook of a task, again, you saw it, you double click, or if rather any other object, again, just double click. All right, so what we're going to do now is, sticking to the agenda, what I'd like to do is, since we've gone through some of the changes in the modeling view, what I'd like to do now is maybe look at some of these changes a little bit more in detail, specifically looking at how the validation has actually changed. So the ability to validate that feature essentially has actually improved in ADONIS 11. So for example here, let's pretend we're going to maybe, for example, create a new draft version of this process. So maybe let's actually reject. So doing that, of course, actually sends it back to a draft state. For those of you who have the release workflow, that should be very familiar to you. But just to show you on an editable form of this model that we're looking at, if we wanted to maybe begin that process, right, the first step you might want to do is actually, after you're done designing, is maybe run a validation. So again, the validation can be accessed at the top, and like before, you can choose the types of things that you actually want to validate by. You can choose them deliberately here, or you can just say validate by all, click that, and that's going to run the validation on the side. So you see here, for example, everything seems to be good. You can actually, if there was any errors or warnings, you would be able to actually filter them from above here. So for example, I'll just show you how that works. If I wanted to hide all of my to-dos, right? In this case, yeah, I mean, obviously there's only one thing being shown, but the way it would work is that you would just click that, and then if you had other things, it would actually show you that information. So maybe let's actually try to deliberately make a mistake. Maybe that'll show you something. Representation, let's go to general information, properties. Let's maybe try to break a gateway together. Yeah, maybe this one's a good one to choose. All right. So some of you might be already familiar with what I've just done, just to maybe explain a little bit better, just to maybe make the validation a little bit more lively in that sense. What I've done is, if you have a situation where you have two non-exclusive parallel gateways, you have to remember that the second one you have to always denote as converging, right? So that's obviously the proper BPMN 2.0 syntax. That's something you might want to validate. I understand maybe it's not important to necessarily every user out there, but again, for those who want to stick to it as much as possible, it is something you're going to have to note. So again, if you click on a gateway to open up its properties, if you go to the specifically to open up its notebook and you navigate to the chapter called Object Properties, normally what you'd have to do is hit the fact that this gateway is actually converging. You'd have to actually select it here and save. Not doing that, again, if we actually rerun the validation, which you can do from up here, by the way, you can refresh, we should see that now we actually get a warning. And if we filter again, so again, before, obviously there wasn't much we can do because we didn't really have anything else going on in our diagram. But in this case, now that we do have a warning, we can actually specifically toggle to that warning and find it. Whereas before in ADONIS 10, we didn't have the really ability to filter. You would actually have to scroll through, and that could be a little bit time consuming, especially if there's many errors. You'd have to go through and find where the warning is and then deal with that warning and fix it before you could actually move through the rest of the release workflow, right? So again, changes in the validation, of course, we can always rerun it up here. We can obviously clear the validation, right, and validate again anew if we wanted to. And really the main difference being is up here, if we want to see just our to-dos, we can do that. And that just shows me our to-dos only. If you wanted to see only our warnings, I can do that by deselecting this one, reselecting our warnings, and seeing that information here in the category that it actually falls in. So again, going back, let's pretend I didn't notice that at first. We fix that here, make it converging. Now we're complying with proper BPMN syntax. For those, again, maybe who are unfamiliar, just maybe give you a really brief understanding of what I meant, is that really what we're saying here is if we move through this task, okay, we move through this task, complete it, we go here, these two tasks actually happen at the exact same time, or not necessarily at the exact same time, but at least they're being performed relatively, not necessarily one after the other, but kind of in parallel. But then obviously, if we're thinking like a computer, if this particular gateway is not converging, what you're telling everyone essentially is that there should be some other parallel task coming up, let's say. So obviously that's not what's going on. Then therefore we have to specify that this particular gateway is not necessarily a parallel gateway, but rather one that actually merges everything back together so the flow can continue. Again, I know that's maybe a little, it's sticking very close to proper BPMN syntax. Not everyone's going to want to do that. I will say, again, in the admin toolkit, when it comes to validation, you can actually configure what causes a warning, what causes an error, what causes a to-do, right? You can change that around. But again, if we're sticking with this, that would be considered a validation error, and it would be something that the tool would pick up. But again, that's a little bit out of scope of today's training, I think. Really, what I wanted to show you was that the validation, first of all, has a few new features. We can validate based on the different categories, like before or all of them. And then, of course, here we can obviously rerun the validation very easily, filter for any errors, to-dos, warnings, etc. very easily. And of course, we can actually then finally open and close this panel at will just by hitting this arrow that's to the right of the screen. Again, sticking with some changes to the modeling panel, just to show you on this more populated version. If we wanted to, for example, let's say run a simulation on this particular model, you'll notice here, again, if I zoom in, you'll notice that we've actually entered some information relevant for simulating this particular process. If we wanted to run the simulation, that's actually something, again, that you can trigger from the updated context menu. Same place where I showed you to be able to number different things, align, or even change the modeling direction. You would be able to actually run the simulation from this option here, the process analysis. You'd be able to activate either the simulation feature or the associated process stepper feature. I won't go through those today because, again, they're slightly out of scope of the training. But again, if you have these options, if you are making use of the simulation, this is where you'd be able to run it again. So again, context menu, down here, process analysis, you'd have both options actually appearing here. Also as well, the nice collaboration feature. Again, this is not a feature that maybe a lot of people really know about. If you ever wanted to maybe work with someone on a particular model, what that's going to do is open up a little chat on the side. So you could, for example, chat with your users. They can make maybe change requests, for example, other designers, let's say, so you can kind of keep a running tab of the changes on your models. It's a little bit more a dynamic way to maybe make changes and collaborate with each other. Maybe a little bit more informal as well, but I wanted to show you that that option is still there. And again, you activate it from the 3 dots over here, right? The context menu. So with that being said, I promised I'd come back to the Insights chapter, or rather, sorry, the Insights tab over here. And maybe just to talk about it a little, let's just actually, again, if we go back to the more populated model that we had open just a while ago, I go to my recently opened here, and let's take a look at that. Might be a little bit better to see the Insights dashboard on one of these. There we go. So if I go to my Insights dashboard, if we just trigger it, we're going to see some new changes that have appeared for the Insights dashboard that are different from ADONIS 10. So first of all, as well, you saw that I could actually open up the Insights dashboard directly from that modeling panel at the top of the modeling page. It's from here, basically, just to recall that the Insights dashboard, the idea here is to get essentially, it's a page that essentially pulls surrounding information about this process and actually presents that information into an easily accessible page. The benefit being you don't have to necessarily open up a notebook of this or that object or this or that task. You kind of get, or this other process that it's related to, you're kind of getting all of that information in one page that's relevant for your analysis, right? That's the idea. So first of all, we're seeing, again, we can see here that we have the process owners named at the top, so we can understand who is actually ultimately responsible for releasing this process. We can see here the process hierarchy. So this one is very simple. We can see that it's part of the advised customer processes within our bank. We can see here that it actually has a sub-process in it. So this is the one we're looking at here, again, just helping us helping orient ourselves maybe within the process hierarchy. What's actually different and new on the ADONIS 11 Insights dashboard for our processes, right, for our models, is this, the SIPOC analysis. So to understand what SIPOC is, for those who are unfamiliar with this acronym, you can actually select the little button over here, for example, and hit Info. And this kind of gives you an idea of what SIPOC actually summarizes. So as it says on the screen, it gives you a compact insight into your process, shows you, for example, the suppliers of information into the process, right? And obviously who's going to supply that information, what those inputs are, what the outputs are, and who actually receives those outputs. So it's something that, again, is being more widely used. And again, in BOC's opinion, it's something that's a good way, it's a good acronym to actually completely summarize in a very succinct way kind of how your process is actually working. If we think about if we're creating a new customer, these are the branches within internally that are actually going to be affected by that, right? So we would need to know that, and we would need to know what they need and essentially how they're going to get that information, right? So that's what SIPOC really comes down to and shows. Moving down, again, we have the RACI inputs and outputs for this particular process. So again, without having to necessarily create a matrix or anything like that, you kind of get an idea of who's involved in this process and how they're involved. You see the inputs and outputs, right? Rather, if they're a reference document or indeed an input and output, and the file type, if it's a Word file or a PDF, for example. We can see the IT system resources, how this process is actually scored in terms of its maturity analysis, for example, some insights into the risks associated, KPI information, and of course, if there's any actual projects that are associated with this process, maybe to, let's say, improve it or maybe introduce a system that will affect it, for example, we can see that information also here. So again, hopefully you're getting an idea. You probably already know that the idea of the Insights dashboard is to pull that information into one page. And again, really the main change here being this new SIPOC widget. So the question might then become, well, then how do you actually fill in that widget? So again, if I just maybe go back to my model here, just to show you again on the properties notebook, right? The relevant chapter for that information to actually activate and have information appear in the SIPOC widget is actually here under customer and suppliers. So you're actually able to see, for example, who the process customers are. Again, we can get an idea of what that actually means, right? Who the suppliers are, for example, and of course, the inputs and outputs would be here as well. This chapter hasn't changed too much. It's just now become relevant for it's become relevant for that SIPOC analysis. So again, to take advantage of that widget to actually fill in information, you're going to want to make sure you fill out the input and output section and the customer supplier section. And again, maybe just to show you if you wanted to quickly create, let's say, a new relationship within a notebook, right, without necessarily having to drag it and drop it onto the model. As you're aware, click on my object, for example, and maybe I go to, let's maybe choose a document here. Maybe choose this document here, for example, just to show you if we drag in and drop it onto the notebook, we can actually then, the notebook is smart enough to actually suggest to us the relationship that we like to create. So again, if we're trying to create a SIPOC widget relationship, maybe we can choose an input, right? We can create that. It now becomes obviously populated within that particular attribute and should then be visible on the SIPOC analysis. And again, as well, same thing for maybe organizational units in this case, right? If we open up the properties notebook of the entire model, right? Maybe a customer or supplier in this case, whoever it is, we can then maybe add that information again as well. And the tool is smart enough based on the object that you're selecting and which notebook you're dragging and dropping that object into. In this case, the properties notebook for a model can then allow you to choose whether this is maybe a customer or supplier in this sense of this particular process in respects of the SIPOC acronym. So hopefully that makes sense. Hopefully that's you can see at least how we can fill it in. Really boils down to, again, properties and these two particular chapters here, input and output, customer and supplier. And again, how we can also not only drag and drop and create relations directly onto the model itself, But if we want to maybe create relations for the entire model, not necessarily for a unitary or atomic task, we can also double click here, or rather just single click to open up the properties notebook, and of course drag and drop as I showed you, and then the notebook, without having to necessarily navigate to the proper chapter, it will immediately suggest to you the relationships that you want to create based on your selection. So given that we're still on the topic of actually new relations, I'd like to move on to the next point in the training, which is actually some changes regarding KPIs. So ADONIS 11 now offers actually a dedicated relation for linking KPIs to process elements, such as tasks and events. This is actually a change from ADONIS 10. So for example, here we're seeing a KPI linked to a start event. And I think if we actually move downward, we can actually see an example here. If I zoom in again, you can see an example, in this case, of a KPI actually linked to a particular task in this case. So you can now not only assess a process based on its starting and end events and kind of the targets that you might have in relation to those, but also the targets you might have in relation to the completion of a given task, to be able to monitor that as well. So again, with that new relationship, you can really identify which tasks are linked to KPIs, and then from there, you might be able to then take advantage of, for example, maybe a search analysis to actually have that information and then therefore assess whether or not your KPIs are actually being met. So first of all, just to show you as well, clicking on that, highlighting that relationship again, just to show you, we can then see, for example, if I wanted to maybe, let's say, if I wanted to, for example, go to the KPI here, we can see, for example, some of the information that's actually in its notebook, right? We can see responsible person, target value, current value, for example, some value history information regarding continuous improvement, and again, the actual assigned business process elements that are there. So again, this is where you'd actually see that information, and this is where we can actually see the tasks that are related to this particular KPI under the usage chapter here. So like I said, though, one of the main use cases would be, for example, to kind of generate a list of all your tasks or models that actually have KPIs to, like I said, assess them and analyze them. That actually brings us into the next change, major change rather, in our ADONIS 11, which would be the new Find tab. So we've focused so far on new. Let's now head over to Find. Just a quick word on Find. Really, at the end of the day, it's still working like the search analysis or the search function did before. A couple of the main, there's been a few key changes that have made it a little bit more intuitive. One of the main changes being that as soon as you hit Find, the repository actually stays open, so you're actually able to search within the repository here as well. And you're able to obviously perform, for example, the basic search up here, or as well perform a search analysis with your search options and filters. And of course, as well, you might have noticed that a lot of these the ability to, for example, create an Excel or look at the searches that you've previously saved are now to the left, whereas I believe earlier they were actually more toward the right. So like I said, we want to create a KPI search. And the first step to actually do that would be, like I said, to maybe make use of the filters. So for example, here, what we can do is, if I want to go to my objects, maybe I want to see my start events, for example, that have KPIs attached. Maybe I want to add another row, for example, go here. Then I want to see the tasks that have my start event, right? So we're seeing the model that they're in, right? Whether it's a task or a start event. Then from here, what I could do is I can actually then select, if I go to, let's say, performance indicators, I can then, under the continuous improvement chapter, select the fact to see which ones actually have performance indicators in that case, or if I wanted to have more an exact search, I can actually use the property filter in that case. So again, if I wanted to see performance indicators, i.e. KPIs, and select that, hit assign, select not empty. There we go. That's going to show me the start events. Then again, I can do that for tasks down here, for example, has performance indicator, right? Assign, and in this case, we want to say not empty. Choosing not empty means the value will not be blank, meaning, of course, that there is actually something there. We can hit update, and there we go. Now we have a list of start events and tasks that have a performance indicator here. Obviously, this took me a second to build this particular search. So of course, if I wanted to save this search for later, I can do that. I can name this, for example, KPI search. I can give it a description, let's say, I can save that. If I go to my searches here, we can see that now it appears in my list. I can make this public if I wanted to. I can actually share the link to this, the search that I built. If I wanted to, I can share it with another user. But the fact that making it public actually means another user, for example, could take advantage and run the exact same search that I've actually built, and all they would have to do is just hit execute, and obviously it would replicate the search that I've built here. So essentially the benefit being is that you only have to create searches once, and you can then share those searches with other people in the tool. Other ways to do that, though, as well, just to show you, are other things that we can do. Of course, we can still export to Excel if we want to see the exact current view. Remember to export with that option. And of course, as well, if we wanted to, we can clear our search. So again, maybe another change that's a little bit more clear here in the new ADONIS 11 is that the options to actually do these things are actually a little bit more clear, right? They're not just icons. You actually can see where you want to save, where you want to save as, for example, and where you can actually find your searches again, and where you can actually then share that URL with someone else, right? So it's a little bit more clear how to do that. That's essentially all that's really changed in the search. It's just improved in that sense, but the way it works, how it works with the property filters, for example, really, again, just to stress the fact that a lot of that is the exact same. So I'm sure that you will be able to obviously take advantage of the search still use it. But of course, if you have any questions, you can always reach out to us. With that being said, though, like I said, there's really not much more that's changed in the search. It's more or less the same. But since we're on the topic of course, creating analyses, now that we have this table, just to show you that you can still, for example, right away create analyses directly from the table here. If I wanted to run, let's say, a matrix view on one of these tasks, or for example, another type of report on one of the start events, I could do that. I can obviously select everything if I wanted to, right? The way I do that is I select one, I hit shift, go down to 8, everything's selected, and I can then create some sort of report based on my selection here, whatever it is. But to access and actually see all the reports at my disposal, right, especially all the ones that come standard out of the box, that would actually lead us to the Analyze chapter. So the next, rather not chapter, but tab at the top. So we've gone through New, we've gone through Find. Let's take a look at Analyze next. So as I was saying, in terms of reports, I showed you that, of course, the way reports, you can still make reports from the search just by selecting everything, right-clicking, opening the context menu. You'll then see the option to create whatever report you want based on your selection. But again, if we wanted to see all the reports at our disposal, maybe one's organized by, for example, type, right? We have all the different types of reports that we can create in ADONIS, or by business scenario. You'll recall that this should be very familiar to you. This is the reporting board. So the reporting board looks a little bit different, but in general, it works the exact same way. So for example, if I were to, let's say, go back to my quick access, if I wanted to, for example, create, let's say, a standard PDF report of my model, right, of the one that we were looking at before, you'll notice that I went to my quick access, selected something, in this case, a BPM diagram, and then I dragged and dropped it over top of my reporting board, and then I can then select from here the report that I want to create. In this case, I want to create a standard PDF report. Doing that, obviously, as you know, this window pops up. You can choose the property filter you want activated, right? So again, just to maybe give some context here, your admin has the ability to create custom filters, right, based on the information. Essentially what it does is it's going to either show you all the possible chapters that we have, or just a selection of certain chapters that might be relevant for you. For example, if you're not interested in simulation information, that's something that your user doesn't really need. You can obviously choose maybe a different property filter in this case, hit OK, and that's going to affect the information that actually gets put on and included in that standard report that I'm actually generating. And again, you can create those sort of custom property filters if you wish. So again, while that's being created, we can see here that it gets downloaded, and of course we can click it, open it up, and there you go. There's your standard report. And again, I was able to trigger that from the modeling board, from the reporting board rather, just again via drag and drop. So nothing much in that sense has actually changed. Get out of that. There we go. From here as well, again, this is the reporting board. You might also have noticed that we have a separate tab within Analyze. We can see our reports, but we can also go to our dashboards. So maybe just to bring this home a little bit more and make it a bit more clear, the ownership and use and tasks dashboard, if we go back to ADONIS 10, are actually again some of the things that we saw on this modeling panel. So again, this goes back to my previous point when I started this webinar. I mentioned that really a lot of all the features are still there. They've just been moved around. This is a very good example of that. We can see here ownership and use and tasks available here, right, in ADONIS 10. And now those same dashboards are actually available under Analyze, under Dashboards, and are now down here. Okay, so still there, just moved. From here, for example, we can, if we go to ownership, we can see very similarly all the different things that my user is actually, in a sense, owning or somehow responsible for, right? Some of the different models and landscapes for which I am actually named as the owner. Some of the assets that I might be responsible for, not as relevant, but another thing here, we have the data actuality marker. If you want to take advantage of that, essentially here, what it's warning me is that I have not actually checked on the notebooks of these different objects in a while. So for example, maybe I want to take a look at this particular icon, or rather element representing some data, specifically data in regards to our partners. Maybe I want to go through that, take a look, maybe go to edit, take a look at lifecycle information. You can see there's not really anything entered there. Maybe I enter something, then I do that. Then of course I can then select that. What that's going to do is let me know that this one's good. And after an X number of days that again can be defined in the admin toolkit, that might then turn to yellow and then turn to red, reminding me that I have to go back and, from time to time, make sure that the data that I'm storing in my objects, specifically the ones that I'm responsible for, right? So you can see I'm responsible for a few different ones. Obviously, in that case, you want to make sure that the information is up to date, and you can take advantage of that data actuality marker to do that. Of course, again, that's only a suggestion. If you wanted to effectively kind of nullify that, again, there is a possibility to change how many days are relevant for the data actuality in the admin toolkit. But really the main point here, not to get too much lost in the weeds, but really just to show you that from here, this is the ownership dashboard. It works the exact same way as it would before. You can export some of the information. Hitting the information button here tells you essentially what you're looking at, right? Same thing. Statistics for my responsibilities, and really the only change is where you find it, under Analyze, under Dashboards, in here. Same thing with News and Tasks. Again, News and Tasks just shows you some of the changes that have occurred since maybe the last login, for example, and some of the tasks that you have down here, specifically in relation to the release workflow. Again, that should be something familiar to the users who are involved in the release workflow. You'll be able to see that down here, but even those who are not, just as a reminder, if you ever wanted to send anyone any type of task in the tool, again, maybe it's a change request, maybe it's another type of to-do to, let's say, create another object, so on and so forth, you can obviously go to your News and Task dashboard, go to Create New Task, and then from here actually send a message to another user. And in their News and Tasks dashboard, that user will then see a message here appear from you. Let's say they'll be able to read it. Let's say there may be a description of the comment down here, and they'll be able to, again, you'll be able to use that to essentially collaborate a little bit in the tool. But like I said, really the main point here for the scope of the training is where to actually find that ability to do that. under News and Tasks dashboard under Analyze. And again, if you wanted to send a task, you just hit that little downward arrow there, create a task, select the user you want to send it to, give it a subject, give it a description, and so on. You can even, if you wanted to actually link, if you're talking about a specific model or object that you want changed, you can actually link that model to the message even. So you can be very specific in terms of what you actually want changed. So I think it's a nice feature to highlight. So in terms of that, in the design and document scenario, we've covered new, find, and analyze, maybe just to sort of bring things home in this scenario as well. What I'm going to do here is I just need to move my presentation panel out of the way just to show you here the help dashboard, or rather help button, our icon here. Again, just to show you that you might have noticed, if I go back to maybe ADONIS 10, might have noticed, and you might recall, that you can access the Knowledge Center directly from this panel. You can now access the Knowledge Center from up here. So it's a little bit more hidden, more out of the way, but it's still perfectly available. You can go to the help icon next to your user icon here. And again, you can activate the Knowledge Center. A new feature though in ADONIS 11 is this new online help section. So actually clicking that, you'll see that we're brought to an online version of the user manual. You can also navigate to the administrator manual if that's relevant to you. You can keep track of all the what's new features in, for example, the new ADONIS 11. So this might be something you want to come back to after this training, right? You can access our marketplace, for example, here. We can see, for example, if you ever wanted to learn about some of the modules that you can add on to ADONIS, you can do that here. For example, one we'll be taking a look at a little bit later on is actually the reader portal. So the ability for users known as reader pros to actually take advantage of some stakeholder-specific dashboards within the tool. There's been some changes in that scenario, so we'll go over that. But again, this is where if you like what you see and you actually want to potentially, you see a value in that, you want to take advantage of it, you can obviously access that from here directly from, again, the online help. And you'll be able to get some more information on it. And of course, go through the process of maybe getting a demo of it, for example, and so on. So again, the process for that, for upgrading ADONIS, has also been actually changed and improved in that sense. So again, going back here as well, we've gone through the online help. You can access the Knowledge Center, specifically what's new, but of course, at any point in time, you could still actually download the PDF manual should you want to share it out with, with maybe someone else, for example. And again, maybe just going back to the online help to show you, you can actually, because it's online, it's actually easy to search for things. So for example, if I wanted to search for the word maybe matrix view, let's say, actually maybe I probably have to do it from here, it's maybe a little bit smarter. There we go. There we go. So now it's actually showing me everywhere where that word is. I can go to, let's say, complete matrix. Let's say matrix view, it tells me a little bit how to generate it, so on and so forth. So again, it's just the whole point here is that it's become a little bit easier to find information and learn how to use the tool from before, when it was just the PDF manual. So a little bit more dynamic in that sense. So again, going back to the tool, what I'd like to do now is take a step back and kind of recap where we are. So we've gone through the design and document scenario. We've seen how we can create a new model, how we can still add different relationships. We talked about pools and lanes. We looked at the find feature. We mentioned some changes in regards to KPIs, how we can actually link those to tasks. We've gone through the analysis to see the reporting board, for example, the different dashboards that you can still see here in that tab, for example. Now what I'd like to do is actually switch over to the control and release scenario. So users with access to multiple scenarios, again, can actually switch between them from the new scenarios button at the top. That's exactly what you saw me do. I, as a user, have access also to the control and release scenario based on my license, and I can actually navigate to it just by hitting the downwards arrows rather than having to select the different portal that I want to enter, which was like that in ADONIS 10. So here, for example, in control and release, just with my specific user, we can see again some of the different actions that are pending. You'll recall that control and release again has a bit of a role to play in the release workflow. we can see that this particular designer here has a lot of models that are currently in a state of draft that they might want to then submit later on to methodical review. So we're able to actually see that information on the side here, right? We can see all the models that we have in draft. We can see if there were any models under a methodical review, we could obviously filter for those. In this case, there's not too much going on. We can also filter to see the ones that are under business review or that have been released. This is all the ones with actions pending. If we wanted to see, for example, a different view, if I wanted to go to all processes, so every single process that's been documented in the tool, we can obviously see that information. And again, if we wanted to filter maybe to see all the ones that are currently under a business review, we could, if we wanted to, or at least all the ones that are currently released in that sense, or all the ones in draft only, we can see that information, right? Just by, again, selecting the different icons on the side here. This information can, of course, be exported as well. We can refresh it at any time in case there's been any changes. And again, from here, so really the main thing to point out is that actually not much has really changed here specifically. It does look the exact same. Again, really the main change is how we navigate to the scenario, and you do that from the top. You might notice, though, that we also have the ability to, for example, take a look at not only the processes and kind of keep an eye on how many are draft and how many have been released. We also can see on the screen we do have something similar for documents. So navigating towards documents here, take a look again. So it's organized very similarly. And we can see that we have either the actions pending, we can see all our documents, the ones where we're the owner or the author, for example. And what I'd like to do is, instead of running through an example of the control and release dashboard with a process, what I'd like to do is actually highlight the document release workflow, which is not something that a lot of people have seen or that know even exists as a possibility as an add-on within the tool. You might already have it, for example. So it might be worth maybe running through a quick release workflow example, in this case in the context of documents, just to see and verify and understand that really nothing has really changed so much. And for reassurance, and also for those who maybe aren't familiar with it, maybe just to highlight it and show that indeed ADONIS can act as a document management storage system, and that of course there is an ability to regulate and verify and ensure that the documents that we're actually uploading into ADONIS are, like I said, maybe very similar to the release workflow. If processes are of a certain quality are correct. And we can make sure that someone else is reviewing them before those documents actually get released to our readers or maybe even used in models, right? So maybe what I'll do just really quickly, I'll just switch back over to the slides. It'll allow me. The way the release workflow for documents works, it's very similar to the way it works for processes. Just to show you, we obviously, when we create a new document, right? The idea is that there's a business review stage where someone, for example, let's say the owner of the document, right? So we have an author who creates it. The owner is the reviewer, very similar to a process owner. They have the ability to decide whether to reject, sending it back to a draft state, or release it, allowing it to become released and obviously available and consumable to our readers, for example. If there was already a previous version of the document, you'll notice that once it's released, it changes from a version 1 to a version 2, and version 1 actually gets archived. So you still have access to the old documents, or rather the ones that have been versioned in that sense, right? Older versions, they do go into the archive, and of course, those can be brought back also at any point. So again, the workflow, hopefully, you can see it's rather simple. Let's actually run through an example together to get an idea, again, maybe as a refresher of how this dashboard should actually work. And again, to introduce this concept to those who may not actually have the document release workflow, to at least see and understand how it actually works in the context of ADONIS 11. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to go to, first of all, let's make ourselves a designer here. Let's maybe start off, make it a bit more realistic. So for example here, let's say I'm going to create a new document for my organization. I go to new. I can see here from my recommendations panel, again, it's one of the ones that comes up right away. Go ahead and click on it, for example. From here, let's say if I want to, I can maybe enter a name. I can call it, for example, let's say example documents. right? I can give it a description. If I wanted to, for example, in, let's say, the I can obviously change the type of document that it might be. So for example, if it's a work instruction, if it's just information, if it's some sort of form, I get the ability to choose that from here, let's say. Under organization, very importantly, I can then define, so as I'm the one who created this document, I'm automatically created as the author or noted. And from here, I can actually then choose a document owner. So maybe just to show you as well, one more time to go through, maybe drag and drop. If I go to my favorites, maybe don't have it as favorites, that's fine. Let's go to my objects here. Let's go to my users, and let's actually choose, for example, Carol. Right, so she's going to be the document owner in this case. There we go. Some other things that we can do, first of all, if we actually have, let's say, a document, like a physical, rather, not physical, but an electronic, let's say, Word document, for example, that maybe we're working with, you know that there's obviously the ability to, first of all, you might be aware that there is the ability to actually upload those documents directly into ADONIS. So for example, let's say we wanted to upload something like the glossary, let's say. So let's say we wanted to upload the ADONIS glossary into the tool. So you know that what I do if I wanted to actually create a document object with something that's already linked, all I do is I select a document from my desktop like I've done right now. I've gone over here, for example, I can drag and drop it into my object repository, and that automatically creates a draft document down here that's already attached to a reference document. Like I said, this one Word file that I've actually already uploaded, and I can click on that and would actually download, right? So in this case, I am doing it a more manual way, right? So there is the quick way to do it, but just to show you as well, under, for example, under attachments here, you can also, you don't have to necessarily only upload a Word file or a PDF, for example. You can also just upload a link. So this is actually something that a lot more organizations are doing. You might have a link to, for example, let's say maybe SharePoint, for example. But you would be able to also do that. So you have the option of either uploading a quote unquote physical document, or you have the ability to actually enter a link, and that's something you can actually do. So for example, I can put a web page here. So let's maybe take a look at this web page that we were looking at earlier. I could obviously put that information here if I wanted to, and then of course I can navigate to it if I want, right? If we feel that we're done, if we've entered everything that we think we need to enter in terms of this document here, we can of course save it. Again, recall the new feature that I might have mentioned earlier. Once you actually create a model or an object, if you hit save, you are going to be prompted to actually move it and store it under its proper folder in this case. So in this case, if I say this, I know this document belongs to this particular division, I can hit OK. It's going to immediately join that file folder, right? But it may not necessarily be released yet. So again, as you saw, I was able to name the process owner. So I can go to release, I can go to submit to review. That's going to trigger a quick little validation on the document just to see if there's anything that was necessarily missing, right? So it kind of checks it first. Common mistake is that maybe a document owner is missing, for example. And from here, you notice that I clicked out, but you might have noticed that a little lock icon appeared, meaning the document is locked. And it's currently now another user's actual responsibility to release it. So again, we remember that the user that I named was named Carol. And if we log in as that particular user really quickly, there we go. So again, so we've logged in as a new user. Her name is Carol. So Carol's our document owner in this case, i.e. the ones in the business review stage of the document, deciding whether or not this document should be released and then available to the rest of my users, essentially. So again, what I've done really quickly is I've just gone over to the document tab under control and release, right? We can see here that one of the example document we were creating earlier is now available. Just to show you from here, if Carol maybe, let's say one day didn't have really a lot of time, if she wanted to quick release some of these, she could. So for example, just by hitting Control, she actually has the ability to, for example, go ahead and actually, under More, she can actually go ahead and, let's say, maybe reject all of these right away. The reason being is that maybe in this case, she's actually not the owner of one of them. So she has the ability to reject, but she's actually not the final owner. If I wanted to see the ones where she was indeed the owner, I could actually go to that. Then from here, I could then maybe toggle to the ones that are currently just under business review, let's say, right, like that. And again, maybe just to show you maybe a bit more better an example, Carol could then from here actually, now she has the ability to either reject or release all of these at once, okay? So she has the ability to do that if she wanted to from here. But of course, if she wanted to take maybe a little bit more time, she could open up the document that I was looking at, or that we were looking at earlier together. She could, of course, review it, look at the lifecycle information. Of course, in this case, not much has been entered. Maybe that's a reason why she might reject it, let's say. Take a look at general information, let's say. Of course, you know, she could, again, anything that was entered, if nothing was entered, it wouldn't pop up for her. So in this case, if we're maybe going off of a real life scenario, we would say that maybe in this case, we would actually reject, right? If we reject, of course, we can enter a reason why. Maybe, again, not enough information has been included and so on. Rejecting it obviously sends it back to a draft state. And again, if we maybe log out and log back in as our user, the author, for example, again, we can toggle to our control and release dashboard. Very similarly, we can take a look at the ones that, for example, have an action pending in this case. We can see all the ones that are currently in the draft states. If we wanted to, for example, specifically under documents, sorry. So there it is, there's our example document. We've noticed that the minor version has actually increased because it's been rejected. We can click on it and maybe fill in some more information. In this case, maybe we do enter some life cycle information, right? We can say that it's valid from, let's say, today until sometime in 2022, for example. Enter that information, general information here, we can maybe give a description, right? Give it a little bit more context. And then obviously if we wanted to, again, just to remind you, we have the ability to either attach some sort of document, right? Again, I could attach my, let's say if we were uploading the glossary, I could do that. I could upload the glossary, for example, any document you can think of. And of course, I could also, in attachments, I can add a link, which in this case is what is already there. Again, I can hit save, because I've already placed it somewhere, don't have to do it again, and then submit to review again, right? We load the validation. We can have another comment, the ability to enter a comment. If I wanted to see some of that change history information, you can actually open up the context menu. And again, this actually is very similar to the way the release workflow for processes work. Same idea. You can see the three, the context menu here, go to change, and you can see how a complete change history of how this document is actually, the transitions that it's already undergone. And of course, that information is also tracked in the version history section of the lifecycle chapter here as well. But again, let's submit to review. Fine. There you go again. Note the lock icon. It's now out of my hands. And now again, it's the responsibility of Carol to actually release the document. Going to the documents dashboard in this case, you can see the example document again. In this case, maybe she can see that there's some more information that's actually been entered. If we go to show all, right, we have more information listed here, more information listed here, some changes, lifecycle information, version history, and then attachments and so on. And then from there, maybe in this case, we're satisfied and we can actually go ahead and actually release this particular document. And there we go. So that's how essentially the control and release scenario works in terms of this case, not processes, but the document release workflow. So I hope that was useful, and hope now that you have a better understanding of how this scenario actually works. And again, really though, the main thing is how we change from scenarios. If you do have control and release, whether it's for document release, workflow, or processes, or both, this is the main dashboard that you're going to be working with. So what we're going to do now is, that was document release. So what I'd like to do now is actually move on to the final scenario. So in this case, let me just log back out again. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to log in with a completely different user, this time another user named Rich. And Rich is essentially an example of a Reader Pro in ADONIS. The Reader Pros are essentially a specific type of reader who have essentially a specific role within the organization. So the idea is that, for example, they might be process analysts, for example, and the read and explore scenario, or rather the reader module that I pointed out in the marketplace, is actually going to give them, first of all, a scenario on their own where they can perform analyses, still navigate through the repository and so on, but also provide them with user and role specific dashboards that are going to give them a snapshot, that are going to essentially provide them a snapshot of the current status of the BPMN initiative. So like I said, what I've done is I've logged in with a different user. You'll notice that now this user here has no other scenario. They only have one, which is read and explore. So just maybe to really quickly log out and show you again, maybe with a user that has access to multiple scenarios, how the tool actually changes. Might just be good for perspective. So again, ADO, in this case, a power user, has maybe multiple scenarios assigned to them. You can see here that if we wanted to toggle to read and explore for this particular user, they would just select it here. But whereas when we logged in as Rich only had one scenario, therefore there was no need to actually select anything. There was no need to go through any portals. Rich is just brought into the tool in the scenario that applies to that particular user, again, without having to do any sort of extra clicking. But in general, if we just stick with ADO in this case, obviously, just to show you, it works the exact same way, regardless of whether we're logging in as with that other user, Rich, or with ADO in the read and explore scenario. Again, that really just comes down to the licenses that they have assigned to them and the system rules that they have assigned to them. But in general, what we're looking at here in the read and explore scenario is kind of, you can think of it as, again, similar to how a reader might see the tool. First of all, they're able to take advantage of a landing page. So of course, an obvious landing page in this case would be the process landscape, right, of our ADO money bank, or this organization that we're pretending we're kind of in right now. We can of course navigate through if we wanted to see all the processes under financing. We can select that, for example, select again to maybe a business process diagram, and obviously drill through the process hierarchy. And of course, using the back buttons up here, we can drill back upwards, or using one of the windows here, we can obviously navigate to something that we previously had open, right? So again, these navigations, by the way, are working the exact same way. Another thing with the read and explore scenario though, that I do maybe want to mention just before I forget, the filter automatically gets activated. In this case, Rich, in this case, or rather ADO, who's logged in, sorry, will in the read and explore scenario only see anything that's actually been released. That can obviously be turned off. We can just hit that X and then they'll be able to see everything. Might be relevant to them, but by default, it might be nice for the readers to actually see only the things that are released. Because again, if they're performing analysis, it would be, in a sense, if we're looking at, let's say, applications or risks, it would be kind of irrelevant to maybe analyze risks that are, only just being created by someone, maybe don't have any much information into them, in the notebook yet. It might be only, it might be better to maybe for one of these users, like I said, some of the ones I can think of would be process analysts, risk managers. These are the ones who would most benefit from the read and explore scenario. It would be more beneficial to them, therefore, to only see information that's actually been released, that's available, it's ready to go, versus anything that's in draft. But of course, they could still turn off that filter if they wanted to just by hitting that X. Okay, so again, coming back, the first thing that they see when they log in, again, maybe let's go ahead and actually switch our users. So this user, again, maybe just to be very specific, is a one scenario user. They only have the read and explore scenario actually assigned to them. So again, you see that as soon as they log in, they're just immediately brought in. There's no selection needed. We're seeing the tool from a Reader Pro view, similar to how ADO saw it. Of course, they can navigate. They can, of course, expand or contract the model here if they wanted to. Again, they have the ability to browse through things. These links are still active, right? They can then move forward if they wanted to, so on and so forth. You might have noticed that there's also these handy mouse overs that appear over things that are actually, that have information entered into them. These mouse overs, by the way, are also something that's customizable. These, essentially, they can show, for example, in this case, maybe if we move to a process, let's say, again, you notice that it's obviously locked. They can't do any editing, they can't do any designing, but they can obviously still consume information. And again, you can see here maybe very clearly, without even having to click on a task or a sub-process or another object, I'm getting a mouse over showing me important information, name, description, reference document, the application systems that are necessary for the completion of this task. And again, like I said, those mouse overs can actually be customized to show you maybe the controls related to the risk that's attached to this task. For example, it might be able to show you some other information that's in notebook of this task. Again, those things that you essentially see on the screen can be changed if you want them to be. They can be customized. So again, maybe back at the start page here. This would be the home landing page. Again, their starting point would be probably, from a best practice point of view, some sort of process landscape, right? Again, they have the ability to look at their recently opened and any favorites that they might have in this case. From here, if they wanted to start maybe some sort of analysis, they could maybe go to the next tab here. They can see all the processes in the organization, right? They could filter, for example, if they want to look at all the processes that are owned by Carol. I hope I spell that correctly. There we go. Right, so they can obviously filter these tables, for example, right? They can export these tables if they want. They can clear filters, for example. They can add different filters, for example, take a look at, Carol and maybe ones that are in the sales department, for example, to again filter that list. And then obviously here select, again, with a right click and maybe perform, again, some sort of matrix portfolio view, for example, any one of the available reports from the context menu, right? Same thing for documents. Again, mentioning before that document type could be work instructions. So again, we can obviously filter for that to look at only the documents that have been designated type work instruction, who they're used by, for example. Maybe in this case, we want to look at all the ones owned by specifically IT. We can do that, for example. Can filter by description. Again, hopefully getting the idea that really they're just very easy and dynamic to navigate. This, by the way, is completely new from ADONIS 10. ADONIS 10 did not give this type of access. You can also do it for our organizational units in this case as well, right? Filter by description, name. What's useful here as well, maybe just to mention again, something that's not very, maybe not necessarily as known, maybe taken advantage of a lot, at least in my opinion, from a customer success point of view, is actually the insights dashboards for organizational units. So in this case, for example, if we actually filter, let's say for one of them, this one here, private customer and branches, right? So this particular org unit, you'll notice as soon as I hover over it, the ability to open up the insights dashboard for it actually appears. So we saw the insights dashboard and how to activate it for a process. We haven't seen yet is how to actually activate insights dashboards for some other objects. In ADONIS 11, and I think also in ADONIS 10, the insights dashboards for roles and organizational units were already introduced. And again, the ability to access them, you can actually access them from here. And someone who might want to trigger such a dashboard view would again be someone with a read and explore scenario. So again, we can activate the insights dashboard on this particular organizational unit, right? This department. We can see the number of users assigned to it. So it's 2 people in the department, in this department here, right? We have the branch manager and the private customer account manager. We can see the processes that they're involved in, right? Some other insights here, for example, of those processes, we can see again how they're involved, risks, IT systems, right? A very comprehensive list. From down here, for example, again, some overview of the business processes that are relevant to this department, the state that they're in, how they've been classified, some of that information down here again in terms of pie charts, right? Some radar charts of that information, again, some information in terms of the projects that might be associated or being run essentially maybe by this particular org unit, let's say. From here as well, if we wanted to then navigate, let's say, to the insights dashboard of a given role, we can also do that. We can click on one of these, for example, to open up the notebook of this particular role. We can go to insights here, right, and actually see again the insights dashboard for this given role. And again, the benefit of actually triggering the insights dashboard here is we're actually seeing a RACI matrix that shows how this role is actually involved in multiple different processes, right? So we're seeing here that they're the responsible person for this process and this one, the responsible person, but of course up here, they're also to be informed as a step and task in this particular process up here, also to be consulted and so on. So again, you're having sort of this full RACI definition across the board for all of your different processes. So that's kind of the benefit and strength. Again, something that I believe might be a little bit underused of the role insights dashboard. And again, this information can then, of course, be exported. Scrolling down again, we see some similar information, some classification information, and so on. So again, maybe moving back to our, going back to the beginning here, for example. This is where we left off. If we continue down to my BPM, so a very similar dashboard to, or it shows similar information to what we saw in the design and document scenario, in the sense that we have processes here. Some other things that we can see, of course, are how this user is maybe actually involved, let's say, what their role might be. In this case, Rich seems to be the private customer account manager in our bank. We've used them before. So this user can see, okay, this is what they're responsible for doing in this process, for example. Again, they can see how and why that is, because that's the role that's been assigned to them. You can assign them roles, or they can assign themselves role up here by hitting the little plus sign, right? Again, in the ownership dashboard, they're getting essentially, again, kind of a summary, rather, of how they're involved and what they're involved in. All right, but that's obviously not really the end of the story when it comes to the read and explore scenario. So we've gone through some of the major tabs and what's in them, but really the main thing that I want to get across is the actual analyze scenario, the Analyse tab rather. So again, Analyse tab looks very similar. We have the reporting board. Again, reporting board works the exact same way. In this case, maybe if I select, let's say, maybe a process object, let's say, again, drag and dropping, and of course create any view that we want to create, for example. But if we go to dashboards this time under read and explore, you'll notice that we have all of these different sort of user and role specific dashboards that again come pre-configured in this scenario. And again, if you want to take advantage of these, recall where I was on the marketplace page. Again, if you want to take advantage of that scenario, if you think this is useful, you'd be able to start off that process of adding on that module through the marketplace. But again, we can take a look at what we see here. So Rich, I happen to know that this user at the top is actually a process analyst. So again, if we take a look at this process analyst dashboard, in reality, he might only have, or this user might only have access to one of these specific dashboards. But again, this is one specifically built and tailored to information that a process analyst might want to see. So for example, here they're seeing how their business processes have been classified. They have an idea of all the processes in terms of the ones, that are currently been released. KPI information down here to see if most of their, for example, how most of these processes are actually performing in terms of that information, and then all of that information down here as well in a tabular view that again can actually be exported. Just to give you an idea, Rich is not, for example, a risk manager, just to show you, again, there's nothing much here, right? Maybe if we logged in with another user, again, maybe a risk manager, we would be able to see some information here a little bit more populated, right? So again, maybe just to summarize all the ones that we have ones, dashboards for process analysts, dashboards for process owner. In this case, Rich isn't one, but if we log in, for example, maybe with another user, let's say Carol, for example, because she is obviously a process owner, that dashboard for her will look a little bit different. So maybe let's take a look. that dashboard for this user, just to show you. And if we go to control and release, we go to read and explore, right? Analyze, dashboards, process owner, just to show you her dashboard again is a little bit more populated. And again, she's getting some information regarding KPIs as well, the current state that they're in, current and target values, for example. She has the ability also to a data actuality marker. It might be relevant for her, especially if she's maybe, let's say, and somehow responsible for maintaining these objects, right? And again, the ability to actually access the Insights dashboard for some of her processes as well, for which Carol is actually the owner. So again, these are just some of the benefits of the read and explore scenario, and the user-specific dashboards. And again, whether or not you're taking advantage of this scenario, really, I think the main thing that I wanted to get across is that if you are, just to note that, again, some of the dashboards, the dashboards that I've shown you, they used to be accessed from, and if I just move my modeling panel out of the way here, we go back to ADONIS 10, just to show you, they were available down here. Yeah, so under, for example, read and explore, if we log out, you would have seen, if we go to dashboards, this is actually where those same dashboards used to be found. Now they're found actually under Analyze in the read and explore scenario under dashboards. Okay, so again, they're still there, they're still available. You can still take advantage of them. It's just, again, they've just been moved. So the very last thing that I want to show you is, I know we've obviously spent a lot of time on this so far, but the last thing that I want to show you is what the organization portal actually looks like and how the organization portal actually behaves. So to show you really quickly, we log in as a reader. Again, really the main thing that I wanted to show you here is that how the reader access would look like. So again, I've logged into the tool, in this case as a reader. You'll notice that it looks fairly similar to how it did for a Reader Pro, rather someone with the read and explore scenario. But in this case, you'll notice that the Reader Lite, in this case that we say, they have only access to the ability to, they have access to the find feature, which we've gone through, right? So they were able to, for example, they can, for example, search or take advantage of a search that we already pre-built. In this case, again, I'm in a different instance, so I don't actually see that information, but really, the end of the day, it works the exact same way. They have the ability to navigate through the processes, the documents, and the organization, right? And the ability to also trigger Insights dashboards, again, something that could also be relevant for not only Reader Pros, but also for Reader Lites. So really, the main thing here is that all that's changed is that when you log in as a reader, you still see the same dashboard. You don't have access to the recently opened or favorites that a reader pro or someone with the read and explore scenario would have access to, but nonetheless, you still have access to the configurable mouse overs. And again, you can still browse through the process. And if the main change is if you wanted to actually look through and browse the repository, you just have to remember, again, if you log into ADONIS as a reader, you notice that the repository doesn't seem to be available to you, but it actually is. You would just either activate it from this little blue arrow here, or go to find and have it opened up automatically alongside the actual search. So again, that really takes us to the end of the training webinar. So I hope you found it useful. I hope you found it insightful, and hopefully now you've seen some of the maybe benefits of the new version of ADONIS. I just want to say that, of course, if you are interested in either document release workflow or the reader portal access for the read and explore scenario that I went over today, of course, please feel free to reach out to your key account manager for more information. But otherwise, of course, again, I hope you really found this useful, and thank you so much for listening, and have a great rest of your day.